Silence suffocated the grand dining room of Le Palais. Elite socialites sneered as a heavy-set line cook, covered in flour and sweat, carried a simple rustic bowl to the city's most ruthless mob boss. Everyone expected a bloodbath. Instead, the Mafia kingpin dropped to one knee and pulled out a ring. The kitchen of Le Palais in downtown Chicago was a battlefield of stainless steel, open flames, and suffocating egos. It was also the only place where Madeleine Hayes truly felt alive. Madeleine was not the face of the restaurant. At 280 pounds, with soft, generous curves that her oversized, heavily stained chef's coat could never quite conceal, she was exactly the kind of person the elite culinary world loved to hide in the back. In a high-end industry obsessed with wafer-thin appearances, superficial garnishes, and pretentious aesthetics, Madeleine was a glaring anomaly. She was undeniably fat, a fact her head chef, Vincent, never let her forget. "Move your bulk, Madeleine. You're blocking the entire prep station," Vincent snapped, his thin, angular face pinched in perpetual disgust. He pushed past her, deliberately knocking his elbow into her shoulder. Madeleine didn't flinch. She simply shifted her weight, anchoring her thick, sturdy legs against the anti-fatigue mat, and went back to breaking down a massive side of beef with the precision of a surgeon. Her hands, plump and nimble, moved with a rhythmic, mesmerizing grace. She knew the truth that the rest of the kitchen whispered only when Vincent wasn't around. Madeleine was the real genius behind Le Palais' Michelin star. Vincent was just the face, the smooth-talking, slim, traditionally handsome European export who charmed the food critics while Madeleine stayed late into the night, perfecting the complex reductions and braises that gave his menus their soul. But tonight, the usual high-strung tension of the kitchen was amplified into sheer, unadulterated terror. "Listen to me, you absolute amateurs," Vincent hissed, slamming a pristine silver tray onto the pass. He was sweating through his collar. "Lorenzo Moretti is walking through those doors in exactly 2 hours." A collective gasp echoed through the line. Even Madeleine paused, her boning knife hovering over the cutting board. Lorenzo Moretti wasn't just a VIP. He was the head of the Moretti Syndicate, a ruthless, terrifyingly powerful mafia boss who practically owned the city's underground and, rumor had it, held the mortgage to Le Palais. Lorenzo was known for 2 things: his merciless approach to his enemies and his obsessive, unforgiving palate. He had famously shut down a historic steakhouse across town in a single night just because the head chef served him an overcooked ribeye. The chef was never seen in the culinary industry again. "He has bought out the entire restaurant," Vincent continued, his voice trembling slightly. "No other guests, just him and his inner circle. We are serving a 12-course tasting menu. Foam, caviar, gold leaf. I want perfection. If anyone makes a mistake, you won't just be fired. You'll be ruined." Madeleine frowned, wiping a stray lock of frizzy brown hair from her damp forehead with the back of her wrist. "Chef?" she started, her voice calm and grounded amid the rising panic. "A 12-course tasting menu of foams and gels? With all due respect, Moretti is a traditionalist. He's Sicilian. My grandmother was from Palermo. Men like him don't want deconstructed venison. They want heart. They want something real." Vincent rounded on her, his eyes flashing with cruel contempt. He looked her up and down, a nasty smirk twisting his lips. "Oh, of course. Let's listen to the fat girl about what to serve the city's most dangerous billionaire," Vincent mocked loudly. Several of the younger line cooks snickered nervously, avoiding Madeleine's gaze. "Listen to me, Madeleine. Just because you spend your weekends stuffing your face with cheap comfort food doesn't mean a man of Lorenzo Moretti's stature wants a plate of peasant slop. He wants luxury. He wants sophistication. Two things you know absolutely nothing about. Madeline felt the familiar, hot sting of humiliation prick her cheeks, but she swallowed it down. She was used to it. She was used to being diminished, reduced entirely to her size rather than her skill. "Yes, chef," she murmured softly, turning her back to him to hide the flash of hurt in her eyes. "Stick to chopping the onions, Madeline," Vincent spat. "Leave the thinking to someone who actually fits into the dining room." For the next 2 hours, the kitchen was a blur of frantic, chaotic energy. Madeline worked in the corner, exiled to prep work, watching as Vincent orchestrated a symphony of pretentious disasters. He was prioritizing visuals over flavor. The sauces were breaking under his nervous hands. The microgreens were wilted. Madeline could smell the bitter scorch of the truffle reduction from 3 stations away. But she stayed silent. She had tried to warn him. At exactly 8 o'clock, the heavy oak doors of the restaurant locked. The front-of-house manager rushed into the kitchen, pale as a ghost. "They're here," he whispered. The atmosphere in the dining room was heavy, suffocating under the weight of Lorenzo Moretti's presence. Through the small round window of the kitchen door, Madeline caught a glimpse of him. Lorenzo was a striking, terrifying figure. He sat at the center of the grand dining room, surrounded by 6 broad-shouldered men in tailored black suits. Lorenzo himself wore a dark charcoal 3-piece suit that strained across his broad, heavily muscled chest. His face was entirely unreadable, sharp jawline, dark, brooding eyes, and a faint, jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He moved with the slow, deliberate confidence of an apex predator. Vincent sent out the first course, a minuscule dollop of foie gras foam, balanced on a dehydrated cracker, dusted with edible gold. The kitchen waited in agonizing silence. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. The plate was full. "He said it tasted like metallic air," the waiter whispered, shaking. Vincent grew frantic. He aggressively plated the second course, a deconstructed venison carpaccio with a blackberry gel. Madeline watched, her heart sinking. The venison was sliced too thin. It had warmed too much on the pass. When the waiter carried it out, Lorenzo didn't even take a bite. Madeline watched through the window as Lorenzo picked up his fork, poked the meat, and then casually flipped the entire exquisite porcelain plate upside down onto the pristine white tablecloth. The sound of shattering china echoed like a gunshot through the silent restaurant. Lorenzo stood up. His voice was low, but it carried perfectly into the kitchen. "Bring me the chef." Vincent looked like he was going to vomit. He practically crawled out of the kitchen doors, his arrogant posture instantly dissolving into a pathetic slouch. Madeline watched as Lorenzo towered over him. "I did not clear my evening to eat colored air and raw meat smeared with jam," Lorenzo said, his voice a dangerous, gravelly purr. "I am hungry, Vincent. I want food. Food with a soul. I am giving you exactly 20 minutes. If you cannot bring me something that tastes like a human being actually touched it, I will make sure this restaurant is a parking lot by tomorrow morning." Vincent stumbled back into the kitchen, gasping for air. "I don't know what to do," he panicked, grabbing his hair. "Fire the lobster! No, the wagyu! Someone do something!" The line cooks were frozen in terror. Nobody moved. Madeline looked at Vincent, then at the trembling staff. She realized with sudden clarity that if this restaurant went under, these young cooks, the dishwashers, the waiters, they would all lose their livelihoods. And she would lose her kitchen. Without a word, Madeline stepped away from her prep station. She walked past a panicking Vincent, ignoring his frantic orders, and moved to the back corner of the walk-in fridge. Hidden behind a stack of bulk butter, she had a small, personal stash of ingredients she bought with her own money. A beautifully marbled slab of wild boar shoulder, a dish of sun-dried Calabrian chilies, fresh aromatic fennel pollen. She pulled them out. "What are you doing?" Vincent shrieked, as Madeline fired up the largest burner on the stove. "I am saving our jobs," Madeline said, her voice surprisingly steady, ringing with an authority she rarely allowed herself to use. "Get out of my way." Vincent was too paralyzed by fear to physically stop her. For the next 15 minutes, Madeline moved like a maestro. She didn't measure. She cooked by feel, by memory, by the deep, resonant rhythm of her ancestors. She seared the wild boar in rendered pancetta fat until it possessed a dark, crusty bark. She deglazed the heavy iron pan with a generous pour of vintage Barolo wine, letting the alcohol roar and burn off. She crushed the Calabrian chilies with the side of her heavy knife, folding them into crushed San Marzano tomatoes, fresh thyme, and the secret ingredient, a heavy pinch of fennel pollen. She threw a handful of thick, hand-rolled pappardelle pasta, which she had made for family meal earlier, into a pot of boiling, heavily salted water. The kitchen filled with a thick, intoxicating aroma. It was a smell of warmth, of violence, of deep, unconditional love. It was a rustic, intensely flavorful wild boar ragout. Madeline swiftly pulled the pasta, tossing it directly into the rich, dark red sauce. She plated it in a simple, deep, unpretentious ceramic bowl, finishing it with a grating of aged pecorino romano and a drizzle of sharp, grassy olive oil. "You cannot serve that," Vincent gasped, staring at the bowl. It's peasant food. Look at it. It's messy. It's heavy." "It's real," Madeline shot back. She turned to the waiters. "Take it." The waiters collectively took a step back, shaking their heads. None of them were willing to face Lorenzo Moretti again. Madeline let out a heavy sigh. She looked down at her stained apron, brushing a streak of flour off her wide hips. She knew how she looked. She knew she was not the elegant, polished picture of high society. But she believed in her food. "Fine. I'll do it myself." Madeline picked up the heavy bowl. She pushed open the swinging doors and stepped into the dining room. The silence that hit her was suffocating. Every eye in the room turned to her. Madeline felt her face flush hot red. She was acutely aware of her size, of her heavy footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor, of her frizzy hair and sweat-sheened face. One of Lorenzo's men, a large capo sitting to his right, let out a low, cruel chuckle. "Christ, boss," the man muttered, loud enough for the room to hear. "Looks like she ate the rest of the tasting menu before bringing that out." A smattering of cruel laughter rippled through the Mafia men. Madeline's chest tightened, a familiar lump of shame rising in her throat. She kept her eyes locked on the table, her knuckles white as she gripped the bowl. Lorenzo did not laugh. He slowly turned his head, fixing his capo with a glare so chilling, so fundamentally hollow, that the man's laughter died instantly in his throat. The room plunged back into a deathly silence. Lorenzo turned his dark gaze back to Madeline. She reached the table and carefully set the steaming bowl down in front of him. "Wild boar ragout, sir," Madeline said, her voice trembling slightly, despite her best efforts. "With Calabrian chili, Barolo, and hand-rolled pappardelle." Lorenzo didn't look at her face. He stared down at the bowl. The steam curled upward, carrying the rich, complex, spicy aroma of the braised meat. For a fleeting second, The terrifying mob boss looked almost vulnerable. His broad shoulders stiffened. He picked up his fork. He twirled the thick ribbon of pasta, scooping up a generous chunk of the dark, slow-cooked boar, and took a bite. Madeline held her breath. Behind the kitchen doors, she knew Vincent was praying for her downfall. Lorenzo chewed slowly. He closed his eyes. The room was so quiet, Madeline could hear the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the foyer. When Lorenzo opened his eyes, they were wide, burning with an intensity that made Madeline instinctively take a step back. He looked directly into her face. He studied her flushed cheeks, her round, soft features, her flour-dusted hands. "Did you use fennel pollen?" Lorenzo asked. His voice was a harsh, raspy whisper. Yes, sir," Madeline stammered, confused. "It cuts the acidity of the tomatoes and enhances the earthiness of the boar. It was my grandmother's trick." Lorenzo slowly stood up, pushing his chair back. He was a towering, imposing man, easily dwarfing Madeline, yet there was no threat in his posture now. "5 years ago," Lorenzo said, his voice echoing through the silent dining room. "I was bleeding to death in an alley in the South Side. A woman pulled me through the back door of a closed bakery. She didn't call the cops. She stitched my side with a sewing kit, and to keep me from going into shock, she fed me a bowl of food she was cooking for herself." Madeline's breath hitched. Her heart began to slam against her ribs. 5 years ago. The bakery she used to work at, before she saved enough for culinary school. The man covered in shadows and blood. She had never seen his face clearly in the dim light. "When my men finally found me, she had vanished," Lorenzo continued, stepping closer to Madeline. "I never saw her face, but I remembered her soft hands." He looked down at Madeline's flour-dusted, plump hands. "And I remembered the food. I have spent 5 years tearing through every high-end restaurant and back-alley kitchen in this city, looking for the person who could make this exact dish." The capo who had laughed earlier was staring, his jaw practically on the floor. Lorenzo reached out, his large, scarred hand gently wrapped around Madeline's trembling wrist. The warmth of his touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. "They laughed at you," Lorenzo murmured, his thumb brushing a speck of dried sauce off her skin. "They looked at you and saw someone they could mock. I look at you, and I see the woman who saved my life. I see a queen." Before Madeline could process the words, before her mind could even begin to comprehend what was happening, the most feared man in Chicago did the unthinkable. He let go of her wrist, took a step back, and sank down onto one knee right there on the dining room floor. He reached into the inner pocket of his charcoal suit and pulled out a velvet box, snapping it open to reveal a diamond so large and flawless it caught every beam of light in the room. "Madeline Hayes," Lorenzo said, his voice ringing with absolute, terrifying devotion. "Marry me." Madeline's breath evaporated from her lungs. The diamond caught the dim amber lighting of the chandelier, fracturing it into 1,000 blinding shards. The dining room of Le Palais was so silent that the distant hum of the industrial refrigerators in the back sounded like a roaring jet engine. "You," Madeline choked out, her voice barely a whisper. She looked from the flawless, glittering stone to Lorenzo Moretti's intense, dark eyes. "You want to marry me? Over a bowl of wild boar ragu. I want to marry the woman who looked at a bleeding, dying man and chose mercy over fear," Lorenzo corrected, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "I want to marry the woman who possesses the heart and the heat to cook like that. Beauty fades, Madeline. Power shifts, but loyalty, courage, and a soul that creates life-saving warmth in a so brutal world. That is a rarity. I've searched for you for 5 years. Behind the swinging kitchen doors, Vincent could no longer contain his raging ego. The idea that his fat, ridiculed prep cook was being proposed to by the most powerful man in Chicago, while his own exquisite tasting menu was scraped into the garbage, broke his fragile mind. He burst through the doors, his pristine white chef's coat trembling with indignant fury. "This is a joke!" Vincent shrieked, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger at Madeline. "Mr. Moretti, please, you cannot be serious. She is a nobody. Look at her. She's massive, she's unrefined, and she stole that recipe from my personal notebooks. She is an absolute fraud." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The romantic, suspended tension snapped, replaced by an icy, suffocating dread. Lorenzo did not stand up immediately. He slowly closed the velvet box, the loud click echoing like a hammer striking an anvil. He rose to his full, towering height, his broad shoulders blocking out the light. He didn't even look at Vincent at first. He simply adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke charcoal suit. "Carmine," Lorenzo said softly. The large capo who had mocked Madeline earlier, and who now looked deeply, profoundly apologetic, stepped forward with terrifying speed. He grabbed Vincent by the collar of his chef's coat, lifting the arrogant man entirely off his feet. Vincent kicked and squealed, his expensive clogs dangling awkwardly above the hardwood floor. "Madeline Hayes is an artist," Lorenzo said, finally turning his dead, shark-like eyes upon Vincent. "Her hands saved my life. Her food brought my soul back to my body. And you, a fragile little man who serves metallic air, dared to disrespect her in my presence." Lorenzo pulled a folded, heavy cream envelope from his breast pocket and tossed it onto the spilled venison carpaccio on the table. "What is that?" Vincent gasped, struggling for breath as Carmine's grip tightened. "That is the deed to Le Palais," Lorenzo said coldly. "I bought the building and the business 3 hours ago. You no longer work here. In fact, if I ever see your face in a kitchen in this city again, you will be providing the meat for the next ragout. Throw him out into the alley." Carmine dragged a sobbing, terrified Vincent through the dining room and out the back service doors. The thud of him hitting the pavement echoed into the quiet night. Lorenzo turned back to Madeline. The terrifying mafioso melted away, leaving only the man she had patched up in that dimly lit bakery on the south side all those years ago. He extended the box toward her again. "The restaurant is yours," Lorenzo offered softly. "The kitchen is yours. Do what you want with it. Run it. Burn it down. Build an empire. Just let me stand beside you while you do it." Madeline looked down at her flour-dusted apron. She looked at her wide hips, her thick arms, her soft stomach. For her entire life, society had told her she was too big, too much, fundamentally unworthy of luxury, love, or the spotlight. Yet here stood Lorenzo Moretti, offering her a crown. "I am not a trophy," Madeline said, her voice finding its anchor. She stood tall, refusing to shrink. "I am a chef. I work 70-hour weeks. I sweat, I burn myself. I eat comfort food because I love it. I will not diet for your syndicate, and I will not be a mob wife who sits quietly in a penthouse while you handle the real business." Lorenzo's lips curved into a rare, devastatingly handsome smile. "I wouldn't have it any other way, my queen. I don't want a quiet wife. I want a partner." Madeline took a deep breath, the scent of the Calabrian chili and braised pork still lingering in the air. She reached out with her plump, capable hand and let Lorenzo slide the heavy diamond onto her ring finger. 6 months later, the newly rebranded La Regina was the most exclusive, fiercely guarded restaurant in the country. Madeleine had completely overhauled the pretentious, sterile environment Vincent had created. The dining room was now warm, draped in rich burgundies and heavy mahogany, echoing the historic speakeasies of Al Capone's era, but with a modern, matriarchal elegance. She was no longer hiding in the back. Madeleine ruled the pass. She wore a custom-tailored, immaculate black chef's coat that hugged her generous curves perfectly, embroidered with a golden crown on the breast. She was larger than life, a formidable, commanding presence whose culinary genius was now undisputed. Her size, once a source of mockery, was now a symbol of her power and indulgence. She tasted everything. She loved her food, and she loved her life. But marrying the head of the Moretti syndicate came with unprecedented dangers. It was a Tuesday evening, the night of the dreaded sit-down. Lorenzo was hosting the heads of the Lucchese and Romano families to negotiate territorial lines along the Chicago waterfront. The private dining room in the back of La Regina was sealed off by a dozen armed guards. Madeleine was preparing the main course for the summit, a delicate, slow-roasted branzino with a lemon caper butter sauce. It was a diplomatic dish, light but intensely flavorful. As she plated the fish, one of Lorenzo's new servers, a nervous young man named Paulie, reached for a small crystal vial on the prep station. "Mr. Romano brought a gift, Chef," Paulie stuttered, handing her the vial. "He said it's a rare, imported white truffle oil from Alba. He requested you finish Lorenzo's plate with it as a gesture of peace." Madeleine frowned. She unscrewed the gold cap of the vial. As a master chef, her sense of smell was her greatest weapon. She brought the vial to her nose and inhaled deeply. Instead of the deep, earthy, intoxicating funk of real white truffles, she detected a sharp, cloying, deeply unsettling scent. It was faint, masked heavily by synthetic truffle flavoring, but underneath it lay the unmistakable stinging aroma of bitter almonds. Cyanide. Madeleine's blood ran cold. The Romano family wasn't here for peace. They were here for a quiet assassination. "Stop service!" Madeleine roared, her voice booming over the clatter of the busy kitchen. Every line cook froze. She grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet and marched out of the kitchen, shoving past the armed guards stationed at the private dining room doors. She kicked the heavy oak doors open. The loud bang made all 3 Mafia bosses jump. Lorenzo, sitting at the head of the table, instantly reached for the holster inside his jacket, his eyes darting toward the threat. But it was just his wife. Madeleine marched directly to the table, her face flushed with fury, the heavy skillet gripped tightly in her hand. She slammed the vial of truffle oil down onto the polished wood right in front of Don Romano. "You insult my intelligence and you disrespect my kitchen," Madeleine growled, leaning heavily over the table. She stared Don Romano dead in the eyes. "Bitter almonds? Really? You try to poison my husband with a cheap, synthetic truffle oil laced with cyanide. You're not just a coward, Romano. You have a completely unrefined palate." The room erupted into absolute chaos. Lorenzo's men drew their weapons, aiming them directly at Romano and his entourage. Romano turned ghost pale, stammering frantically, trying to deny the accusation. "Make him drink it," Lorenzo ordered softly, his eyes locked on the terrified rival boss. "If it's just truffle oil, Don Romano, garnish your own bread." Romano scrambled backward, knocking his chair over, implicitly confessing to the attempted murder. Lorenzo's men swarmed him instantly, dragging the screaming rival boss out the back door to face syndicate justice. Lorenzo turned to Madeline. The room was heavy with the smell of gunpowder and adrenaline, but Lorenzo only had eyes for her. He walked around the table, ignoring the violence he had just ordered, and pulled his wife into a deep, passionate kiss. Twice, Lorenzo murmured against her lips, his hands resting reverently on her wide, soft waist. You have saved my life twice, Madeline. Once with your kindness, and once with your genius. Madeline smiled, a fierce, triumphant grin. She adjusted the collar of her black chef's coat, feeling the heavy diamond ring on her finger catch the light. I told you, Lorenzo, I protect what's mine. Now sit down. The branzino is getting cold, and I completely refuse to serve ruined fish. As Lorenzo sat back down, watching his beautiful, powerful, plus-size wife command the room with effortless authority, he knew one thing for certain. Madeline Hayes didn't just rule his kitchen, she ruled the entire city. And anyone who dared to laugh at her ever again would not live to see dessert. If Madeline's triumphant journey from an underappreciated, mocked chef to a powerful, fearless mafia queen kept you on the edge of your seat, we need your support. Like this video to show love for our plus-size heroine. Share this thrilling story with your friends who love an epic culinary revenge plot. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more intense, jaw-dropping, romantic dramas. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a twist.